My father came to America in about 1895.
Mm-hmm.
My mother came over about 3 years later with her family.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather had been to America off and on before that, but he used to make enough money to go back and visit the family, besides what he was sending him, because he worked on the railroad. And he made 3 trips, but on the 3rd trip, he brought his whole family back.
Okay.
And at the time, he had, I think, 4 children.
Mm-hmm.
5 of them on the way. My mother was 14 when she was here,
Okay.
and they went to work on the farms in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
And she hated it so badly that she said that she was going to get married just to get away from it. Well, of course she didn't, though. My father was a handsome man.
Mm-hmm.
He was in his age, in his youth, he was a redhead.
Is that right?
Of course, in his later years, he was auburn.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a very, very calm person most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And he fell in love with her. And I remember her saying that, because we asked her about the courtship in those days, and she says, they used to have to sit on opposite ends of the room. And one time there, my father sat next to my mother on the sofa. Her father went up and slapped her for allowing him to do that. So, of course, she was married. She was 15.
Mm-hmm.
Had her first baby at 16. Because in those days, if you didn't have a baby right off the bat, something was wrong.
Yes,
Yeah. Well, Dad and Grandpa worked on the railroad until I was about maybe 2 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And we lived together in this big building on Erie Street, the Ortolano Bank building.
This was in Buffalo?
Yeah, yes, in Buffalo. And then on the ground floor, there was the bank, and then there was a little grocery store next to it. And for some reason or other, the people moved out.
Mm-hmm.
So my father and my grandfather decided it was time for my father to do something else besides the railroad, because there was no future in it.
Mm-hmm.
I think at the time they were getting maybe $1.25, or I don't know whether it was a week or a day,
Mm-hmm.
but it wasn't enough anyway.
Yeah.
So my dad and my mother opened a little grocery store down there, and it had sleeping quarters in the back. So they stayed there until the baby was weaned, and then upstairs to Grandma. So we lived with my grandmother until I was about 7 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Well, by that time, my mother had had 3 children. My grandmother had had her last 2. I had an aunt that was 6 months older than I was,
Oh, my God.
and an uncle that was 2 years older. Yeah. So, but it was one big happy family.
Sure.
It was the best years of my life. Well, then it was time to move on because the boys were growing up. They needed more room, So my grandmother.
How many children? How many siblings do you have?
My grandmother had, let's see, Mom, Jack, Joe, Andy, Nettie, Mary, Mike,
That's 6.
Sam, and Mill. 8 children.
My God.
And how many did Grandma have? Total.
Who?
Your mother.
My mother had 6.
6 that lived
Yeah.
altogether.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, she had the one that died, the first girl.
Didn't she have a boy die too?
Oh, yeah. I forgot about him. Yeah.
8.
Yeah. So, yeah. Mom had no living. She didn't have 6 living.
Aunt Dodie, Aunt Mill, Aunt Jane, Uncle Fred, Uncle Jim, and you.
Oh, yeah. Well,
6.
Mm-hmm.
and then, of course, as I say, we had to split up. My father and mother rented a place about 2 blocks away from where Grandma lived.
Mm-hmm.
So it was always very easy for us to run in and out. And the one thing that I remember the most about was winter nights. We would sit around the pot-bellied stove, and my grandfather would tell us fairy stories in Italian.
Ah.
Yeah. And there was one that stayed in my mind. I don't know what the theme was or anything, but the title of it was The Talking Parrot.
Talking
Yeah, in Italian, it's Pappagallo che parla. Yeah. So, as I said, it was a great life, but we all had to move on. Then my aunts and uncles began to get married. Yeah. And we moved back into the Longino building, the Longino Bank building, which was diagonally across the street, which had bigger quarters, had sleeping quarters in the back. So we stayed there until we moved to the house that we bought on Prospect Avenue, and that's where my sister still lives. Yeah.
Yeah, they ran a store.
Yeah, my father and my mother were retired then, and that's when I was going to college. But all my life, because I liked to read so much, my parents decided I was going to go to college. I was not going to get married at 15 like everybody else was doing at the time. If you weren't married by the time you were 16, you were an old maid, you know. And of course it was what would you call today the inner city, all the new immigrants, because the apartments were big because the families that came were big families, you know. And it was a community in itself. And of course we knew just about everybody because we used to open the store at 5:30 in the morning, and my father would leave for the market at 5 o'clock. My mother would get up at 5:30, and at 6 o'clock she'd get me up, and we'd prepare the stuff for the bachelors who had nobody to prepare a lunch for them. So they used to buy 5 cents worth of this and 5 cents worth of that and a loaf of bread, you know, and that was it. Well, by 7 o'clock, they were all gone. Well, then the best baker, because when he'd come, his bread was still lukewarm. He was the last one to come, and that's when the mothers used to come. And after the mothers left at 8:30 to get their kids off to school, that's when my mother and I had a little respite. And we'd stop and we'd have a piece of bread with maybe a group of a grape or a couple of pears or whatever. But we used to always have that snack at around 8 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. And then I'd have to get ready for school, and the kids too.
You were the oldest, right?
Yeah.
And your mother and dad, did they make a conscious effort to make sure you got through college?
They took it for granted that I was going to get married eventually. But they just were decidedly positive that I had to go to school. I had to go to college. Well, then...
Why did they think that way?
In that area, as I say, most of the girls were married by the time they were 16.
Yeah.
You know. But after we moved on Prospect Avenue, it was a different story.
Yeah.
Because then it was I would say a little better educated class. And we were one of the few Italians in that district because it was mainly an Irish district. Yeah. So originally, my parents had decided that I was going to study pharmacy because my dad and my grandfather bought this big apartment building on the other side of town, and there was a drugstore downstairs. So they decided that if I wanted to go into pharmacy, I would have a place ready for me. But for some reason or other, I decided that if I was going to go into any branch of medicine, I was going to be a doctor, nothing else, you know. So I went to medical school.
I'll be darned.
But
were there many women in medical school?
we were 7 women.
7 women.
But the bias was strong. They wanted to make sure that they were going to weed us out. So I, for one, and a lot of others, we had a prof that taught, question mark, neurology.
Yeah.
But it was common knowledge that he didn't know how to teach. He didn't teach. We were practically on our own, but everybody knew that he marked for the year on your final paper. And everybody knew, too, that that's when he was going to weed out the class for a summer school class. Well, I was one of the few, and the other 2 girls were, too. And he gave us all, I guess, about half the class a conditional mark. Well, I wasn't about to do it, repeat.
Yep.
I used to go home at night with the worst headaches. My mother finally, now I think it's funny, but one night there she actually put some sliced potatoes in a sling and tied it around my forehead, thinking they would drive the pain away, you know. Talk about your rural medical things. Of course, it didn't do a bit of good for me. But I decided that medicine was not for me.
Yeah.
I just couldn't take it. And I noticed that my daughter Barbara went through the same thing.
Yeah.
The stress was so great that she was getting an ulcer.
Mm-hmm.
And her family doctor, who happened to have been one of my past teammates in school, advised her to do something else.
Mm-hmm.
So she became a medical technologist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I still did not want to go into pharmacy for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe I thought it was too many hours or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I just had that feeling I was not meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I just didn't. But my parents still were just obsessed with the idea that I had to go to school. Whatever I wanted to do was all right with them, just so long as I went.
Mm-hmm.
And a chance remark by a visiting sailor at the time, who later became a judge in Buffalo, sent me off to law school because he came into the store and the place was crowded. And of course, I used to I don't know that I knew them, but I used to use it in the different dialects, you know, with the different people. So he just stood there. And he stayed there for about an hour. And at the time, I was, I wouldn't say I was starstruck or whatever, but I thought anybody that went into the services was good, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I admired him for being in the Navy. And he turned to me before he left in there and he said, you know, you should be a lawyer. Well, that stuck in my mind. And later on, as I say, he became a city judge,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So when my parents asked me what I wanted to do, I said, you know, I think I'll go into law. They were struck. Law? Who ever heard of a woman lawyer? And I says, well, I really would like to try it. Yeah. Are you sure you don't want to go somewhere else to study medicine? No. You don't want to go into pharmacy? No. All right, go to law school. So I went.
You went to University of Buffalo.
Yeah.
And you were, how many years was law school then?
Well, 3 years.
3 years.
Yeah, that's what it was then. I don't know what
Still
it is
is.
now.
So, were there many female law students?
We were 5 in our class. But, and this struck me funny at the time, one of the girls that had been with me in medical school happened to be a good friend of mine, decided that we were going to go see the dean. So we went up there, and she asked him right out. She says, Dean Alden, she says, is there a bias against female students? Because we came across that in medical school. She told him right out.
Yeah.
You know. He says, as long as you do your work, he says, that's all that's required of you. But he made sure we did our work, because we got called on all the time.
Did you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Did you feel like you were being picked out or picked on?
At medical school, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, they made no bones about it.
Yeah.
There was bias there. They didn't want women in the medical field,
Mm-hmm.
you know. The 3 that stayed with them, 3 were there? Yeah. Helen Walker, she had been at one time a teacher. Eugenia Franzak, her father was the city physician at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And Thelma Brock, who was almost a genius. Yeah, they were the 3 that were left. The rest of us, we decided that was it. Yeah. So,
Was law school a little bit different though? Did you feel like they were picking on you there?
We didn't feel as though we were being picked on,
Right.
you know. We felt after he told us that, we decided, well, we were just going to do our work, that's all. So every night after classes, we'd always go across the street to the library in the Erie County Bank building, Erie County building, and that's where the law library was at the time. And we'd brief our cases. By the time I got home, it was about 9:30 every night, and it was pretty tough.
Yeah.
But I found I was enjoying it. And of course, after I met my husband, it was made even nicer.
Yeah. Now, did you meet him at law school?
Oh yes,
Did you?
yes.
Were you in the same class?
No, he was a year ahead of me.
Year ahead?
Yeah. I met him in the library of all places.
Did you? What did you think when you laid eyes on Ross Spoto?
Well, you know, it was funny. We were upstairs in the school library.
Mhm.
And it seemed to me that I felt eyes boring into me. I always remembered that, you know. I looked up and there was this man across the street, across the room, and it seemed that every time I raised my head, he was looking at me. And I kind of liked the feeling. So this happened a couple of times. So when that happened again, I turned to the girl that was next to me, and I said to her, you know, I said, that fella keeps staring at me. I wonder who he is. Oh, she says, I know him. I says, who is he? Well, his name is Spoto. Well, at the time, he used to go under the name Saro, you know, which is the
Rosario.
abbreviation of Rosario. Yeah. And I said, well, I'd like to meet him. Yeah. Well, then, I think this was the first week of school. We were going downstairs, and he was coming upstairs, so he stopped, you know. And Ursula turned to him, and she says, I've got a friend here that wants to meet you. I'll never forget that. I could have kicked her. And that was the beginning of it.
Yeah.
And after that, it seemed that every time I bumped around, he was there.
Yeah.
So he started walking me home, and I would meet him at the library and all that, and we started off that way.
Yeah.
By the end of the year, we were going steady.
I'll be done.
Yeah.
And my parents weren't too crazy about the idea, because the men that I had gone with before, a couple of them had been out of town, and they didn't like the idea. So they were glad when I broke it up.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't like the idea that I was going steady with him. But I told them then that I had decided that he was the one.
I'll be darned.
So they just had to accept it.
Was he deemed an outsider because he was from Faulkner? I mean, outside of Buffalo?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They didn't want me to leave Buffalo.
Yeah.
And of course, the first time that my dad took me to Jamestown, he wasn't that crazy about Jamestown either.
Very.
Yeah. But
What did he say about it?
well, they didn't try to dissuade me of it.
Yeah, yeah.
But I knew that they weren't too happy about it,
Mhm.
you know. But I told them right from the start that he was the one and they was going to marry him. And of course, I graduated in June. We were married in September.
Is that right?
Yeah. So
And he did he do 2 years or 3 years?
oh no, he finished the 3 years. Oh yeah.
But he went into law school after 2 years at Niagara.
That's it.
That's
Yeah.
what,
Yep.
he didn't go full time. You know,
Yeah,
4 years.
he'd gone to Niagara because his parents, in those days, you know, if you had a son that was a priest, that was pretty good stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah. They were kind of hoping that he'd go into the seminary, but he decided it wasn't it for him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then I don't know what caused him to go to law school, but he changed from Niagara to the University of Buffalo.
So you met him at Buffalo Law School. He was a year ahead of you.
Yeah.
Then he would have graduated a year ahead of you.
Oh, yes. And he passed the bar the first time.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And then did he come to Jamestown after that?
Oh, yes. He was in the office of Joe Rice.
Okay.
And Mr. Rice was one of the most prestigious lawyers in Jamestown at the time.
Mhm.
He had been, I think, district attorney of Cattaraugus County.
Okay.
Yeah. And he was quite well known and very respected by all the other lawyers. So it was quite a feather in his cap to be able to get into his office. Yeah.
Were there any other Italian lawyers in Jamestown area at the time?
The only one that I knew of at the time was Sam Alessi.
Was he? Yeah.
And later on,
Oh, was that right?
it was, they lived up
3
on the
blocks up.
corner of Colin and Myrtle.
Middle.
Yeah. And we got to be quite friendly with him and his wife Ethel.
Mhm.
At the time, I was expecting her, and Ethel was expecting Sam Jr., you know. And Sam was practically the one lawyer that the Italian community went to, except that in Faulkner, Rex Crosby was on the ground floor, you know.
Ah.
So that helped people that didn't want to come to Jamestown went to Rex Crosby. But one thing that disturbed me, it didn't disturb my husband, was that the Falconerians didn't come to him. They still stayed with Sam Alessi and with Rex Crosby.
I'll be there.
You know. So my husband's biggest clients were non-Italians.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, that's a real tribute. What did you do during that year? Year one, you're up at law school. You've got to finish your senior year, and Ross is down in Jamestown, right?
Oh, yeah.
Was that difficult?
No, because he used to come up once a month to see me.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Then you graduated from law school. Did you know you'd come back and work with your husband?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. It was understood.
Understood?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But technically, I was with Mr. Rice.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
What did
That's
he...
where my name comes from, my middle name.
Is that right?
That's what the R stands for.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
What did he have you do?
Oh, I used to do, wait a minute, I have to stop and think. Well, for one thing, I had to look up law for him.
Yes.
Yeah. And then I would help with bringing down searches.
Okay.
Yeah. I remember the first time I did it. I brought it down to the very last, to the person who was buying the stuff, and I left his name out. Ross brought that to my attention. Well, I never made that mistake again.
Yes.
Yeah. But after 2 years, I decided that I wanted a family.
How did the lawyers treat you?
Coolly.
Coolly?
Yeah. I remember I went to a luncheon at the bar meeting, you know, and some of the men forgot themselves and used kind of salty language, you know, and it kind of put a damper on them. And I said to Ross, no, I'm not coming again to bar meetings, to bar luncheons. I says, I'm just a damper for the fellas. They like to get together and just let their hair down. So I never went to another one.
Mm-hmm.
But Judge Ottaway, God bless him, see me, hello, counselor, you know. And some of the others would call me the same thing, but most of them would just say Mrs. Spoto.
Mm-hmm.
So that was it.
Did that bother you?
No.
No.
No, because I still was a holdover from the bias part, you know, and you expected that the men were going to be cool toward a woman in their field.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't bother me. Yeah. But in our office, too, was Judge Rexford, and we got to be good friends with him and his family, you know. He was a salty son of a gun.
Was he?
Boy. His speech. Yeah. Yeah, but he had a son, Chet. I forget what his daughter's name was. But we got to know them pretty well. They lived in Bemis.
Right.
Yeah.
Were there a lot of lawyers at the time? This would have been about, what, 1928 or 29?
Yeah, there were. There were a lot. In fact, I always wondered how Jamestown could support that many lawyers. And we were talking about that with Charlotte today. And I says, now, a city as small as Jamestown, to have as many lawyers as it has, as many firms, how can everybody make a good living? Well, then she had to explain it to me, that it wasn't just Jamestown.
Right.
It was Ellington, it was Bemis Point, it was Lakewood, and, you know, It was all the small towns that came into Jamestown for that.
Right.
But apparently, all the firms are doing well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't see
Surviving.
anybody leaving Jamestown to
No,
go somewhere else to
that's right.
practice.
That's right.
So I guess Jamestown's pretty good.
It's been good. But this was right during the beginning of the Depression. How did that affect?
It affected all of us.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And still, I still had a live-in housekeeper.
Did you?
I've always had a housekeeper all my married life, you know. And I know that Ross struggled and Mr. Rice struggled, but we did the best we could. We, cut corners where we could, you know. Well, by that time, I was out of the office. And
Now, was that a conscious decision by you to say, I want to have a family, and basically after a couple of years?
it was my decision
Yeah.
right along.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at one time there, before Sheila was born, we had decided that I was going to open up an office in Faulkner. Because Ross had heard that the Falconerians were kind of resentful that he had left them instead of staying in Faulkner, since he was a Falconerian, you know. So we thought if I was going to practice, I would open up a place in Faulkner. And we went out shopping for office space. So we finally found a place on Main Street, but it was above the stores, of course, but it had one long room and would have to be partitioned off. So we were kind of hesitating about that, and we thought, we'll wait until the fall. Well, that summer, we visited some friends of ours in Skinny Atlas. And I'll never forget this. And Mary said to me, Peps, because that's what they all called me, Peps. She said, you better be careful because everybody that comes here gets pregnant. And I said, I'm not worried about that. No, I'll be damned. I got pregnant. So that was the end of that practice.
Yeah.
And I never gave it a thought after that. But at the time that right after Doug was born, we decided that I'd open up an insurance agency in the office, because Ross always had to send out, for somebody else. And he says, well, if you want to do something, he says, why don't you just open up your agency here? So I took the exam, passed it, and we opened up. But I got so bored with just sitting around there doing nothing except for when an occasional person came in, that after 5 years, I decided that was it. I had enough of it. So we sold the practice to I forget.
Yeah.
Starts with an S.
Sloan Malhewish? Was it Sloan?
No, the other one.
Yeah. No, I'm trying to think.
Sloan Malhewish wanted to buy it.
Yep.
They sent a man down to ask me. This was before I had decided to sell.
Right.
But I guess the rumor had gotten around that I was thinking of selling, and he came over. And I remember he offered me $5,000 for the practice. And I said I would talk to my husband about it. When I talked to him, he says, who the heck said you were going to sell it? We're not going to sell it. Yeah, well, that was after I'd been maybe about 3 years,
Yeah.
So I stuck it out. And Swan Rowley.
Erickson Swan
Yeah.
Raleigh. Yeah, Swan
Yeah,
Raleigh.
that's who bought the practice. Yeah. And I was glad to get rid of it.
Yeah.
I was enjoying my kids, and I wanted, by that time, that they were all growing up,
Give me the genealogy of Ross's law practice. He comes back to Jamestown. He then works with Mr. Rice.
Yeah.
Then what?
Well, then Mr. Rice died.
Right.
And he went off on his own.
Okay.
Yeah.
Stay nice.
Until my son graduated, came back to Jamestown, and then they started Spoto and Spoto.
Yeah,
Well, then Ross died,
right?
and Doug became Spoto Slater. Yeah, and
it's-
James and Johnson,
Donovan.
and then
Donovan, wasn't it?
yeah,
Walter
until
Donovan,
until he left.
right?
Yeah,
And
so it's
some
been
guy,
Spoto and Slater.
some kid named Sawatka comes in.
Well,
yeah.
now it'll be Spoto, Slater, and Sawatka.
Bring work home to you?
Always, and I used to rave about that because if he was having problems, he just couldn't let it go.
Yeah.
And I said to him, why don't you do like the other lawyers? They lock the door and that's it.
Mhm.
They come home and their home life is different. Well, he says, they can do what they want, I do what I want.
Did he need your help?
Yeah, we used to always talk his cases over.
Did he?
Yeah.
Oh,
Not
yeah.
that my advice was any good,
Oh,
because
yeah.
after all, he really had the brain, and he was conversant with the problems of today, which I wasn't.
Yeah.
So, but it helped him to talk about it.
Tell me about Robert Jackson.
Well, the only time I ever really met him, it was at a dinner party given for the Italian consul.
Mhm.
And he was my dinner partner.
Ah.
And we did the usual chit-chat,
Mhm.
And I was a little nervous because, after all, he was quite a famous personality. And besides that, I was going to have to say a little something welcoming the other man. But during our talk, he asked me if I was going to do trial work. And I says, I would love to do it, but I'm scared at the idea.
Mhm.
He says, if you remember one thing, you'll never be afraid. I said, you go in there with the truth, and you don't have to be afraid of anything. I never forgot that. But he was very pleasant,
Mhm.
and it was a nice dinner. But that's, as I say, that's the only time I ever met the man or had it to do with him.
What was your impression of him, just as an individual? He walks into the room. You'd seen pictures of him?
No, he didn't throw his weight around. He
Yeah.
just sat there, and of course he was asked to say something, but he didn't long-winded or anything like that. He was just very pleasant, just a short speech, and he was very nice to everybody around him.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I think everybody had the same idea that he was a very nice person.
Mhm.
I was very pleased to have at least known him for a short time.
I understand your husband was very much a Republican.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
I don't know. I know one thing, that I was approached for the Republican Women's Organization, to join. And my husband says, you don't want to bother. So I didn't.
Well, Daddy was never one who vouched his political views that I can recall.
Well, he took his politics pretty seriously.
Did he?
Oh, yeah.
Was that usual for Italians to be Republican at that time?
No, because my own father was a Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I always felt that it was natural for a person to be a Democrat. I never gave it another thought.
Right.
And when I married Ross, I said to him, well, when it was time to vote, I said, well, my father was a Democrat. I suppose I better be a Democrat. He said, what for? He said, you make up your own mind what you want to be.
Yeah.
Well, I became a Republican.
Okay, yeah.
No, I think it was because I was having to outgrow all the bias of being an Italian and of being a woman.
Mm-hmm.
So I lived in a fairy tale land. I cleaned out all the fairy tale stories in the Buffalo Public Library until they finally let me go downstairs and take out adult books.
Mm-hmm.
Because there were no more fairy tales that I still loved them. Yeah.
So you were a great reader,
I was, always.
Is.
and still
Oh.
is.
Is.
I always have been. Yeah. I've had a standing, well, I would call it a standing subscription to Reader's Digest and Reader's Condensed Books. I've got a whole library of Reader's Condensed Books. He got his, shall we say, notoriety on a false basis.
Oh, really?
He became well known in the Italian community because he got a man off from a murder charge.
Ah.
The man was definitely guilty.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knew it,
Did
but he got him off.
he get him off?
Yeah. And, that put him on a pedestal where the old-timers were concerned, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody that could do that, he must be wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And they flocked to him.
Is that right?
Oh, yes, they did. Yeah, yeah. And apparently, that wasn't enough for him because then he became a partner with Clarence Pickard.
Clarence Pickard, yeah.
Now, Clarence was quite a character.
Was he?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about him.
I didn't know him very well,
Yeah.
but from what I understand, he was kind of tough to get along with.
Yeah.
But apparently, he and Mike did very well together. We kept touch with Judge Wexford, with Judge Ottaway, Judge Bodine. Those were the three that we really kept
Mm-hmm.
a close friendship with.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and Sam Alessi.
Sam Alessi.
Very proud of my son.
Well, you should be.
Yeah. He's
He-
been,
You should be proud of your whole family. They're wonderful
I am.
citizens.
And I thank God for my family. I've got some very exceptional children.
That's right.
Now, my daughter Barbara is in New York. Now, she worked as a medical technologist in the different hospitals
In Buffalo, a long time ago.
in Buffalo. Yeah. She never came back to Jamestown. And she married a boy from up at Lake George.
Mhm.
He became, until a few years ago, the CEO of the studio that he worked for.
Mm-hmm.
And now he retired, and they have a co-op on West 60th Street in New York, you know. And they're doing a lot of traveling. But it isn't just like Sarita going on her own. They go together as a team,
Yeah.
and they're really enjoying their retirements. Now she did. While her husband was still with the
Television.
I forget what the
Which
name
one?
of it was. Anyway, with the studio, she opened up a print shop too in Long
Mineola.
Island.
Mm-hmm.
You know. Well, then when he retired, she sold the shop and retired too. My father got bombed twice because he refused to be extorted,
Really?
and then he finally had to pay up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And after the second bomb, he figured there's no use in fighting them.
Yeah.
Because they're just going to keep on bombing them out. They didn't try to kill us or anything,
No.
but they threw the bomb into the plate glass window of the store.
Yeah.
Yeah. And evidently they thought my parents were making too much money.
So they'd pay tribute, right?
Yeah. Oh, it was just a one-shot thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, he left us alone. Yeah.
Did all the merchants have to do some of that?
Well, I remember what it's like. I'm telling you, it was...
Were you scared?
Yeah, oh yeah. Especially when I found that my father was shadowing me on the way to school,
Mm.
because apparently I was the target if they didn't pay up,
Oh.
you know. And my father was packing a revolver,
Mm.
but he didn't stay too close to me, but enough behind me so that if anybody got close to me, he was right there,
Yeah.
yeah. But as I say, he paid up and that was the end of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, my in-laws had a slight taste of that. But thank God my husband was smart enough to be able to handle it. This one couple in Faulkner, the man was a bloke. He was big talker. He always liked to boast, and he'd come to the store and he'd carry on for an hour, you know, just blowing air. And one day my father-in-law got this letter saying that he had to pay so much, or else. I forget what the or else was, but whether it was implied or actually direct. Well, my husband had a faint idea who the man was. So he took the letter to the police and had them fingerprinted.
Mm.
Then he took it and went to this man's house. And he showed the man that it had been fingerprinted, and he told him that he knew that he was the one because all he had to do was have the police fingerprint him.
Mm-hmm.
That was the end of that.
No kidding.
Never had another bit of trouble. That was the one and only time.
Yeah.
But thank the Lord, Ross was able to handle it.
Yeah.
And of course, the man never came to the store again.